he was born and raised uptown. And so you would think he would know better. Or at least that he would be better behaved. But oh no, not little Johnny. Little Johnny was the stepchild of the devil. And his parents didn't know what to do with him. He was born and raised uptown. You would think he would know better. Anyway, his parents were all upset when he got kicked out of the public school. And they said to one another, what are we going to do with little Johnny? So they said, well, let's send him to a private school, and maybe he'll be better behaved. Well, that lasted all of 2 weeks. He got kicked out of the private school. So then his parents said, well, let's send him to a military school, and that they might be able to beat some sense in there. That didn't last long. 3 weeks. So finally, the parents, in a last-ditch effort, said, you know what? Let's send him to Jesuit High on Carrollton. and maybe those heretics can beat some sense into him. Well, he goes to Jesuit and he blossoms. Not only is he no longer a problem child, no longer does he have problems with his classmates, but he becomes this wonderful student leader in the school. And his parents are beside themselves. And they're thinking, what did those Jesuits do to him? So finally they asked him. They said, little Johnny, you got kicked out of the public school. You didn't do well in the private school. You didn't do well in the military school. Why is it when we sent you to Jesuit, you seem to blossom? Little Johnny looked up at his mama and his daddy and said, Mama, Daddy, I walked into that classroom and I saw that man on the cross and I knew the Jesuits meant business. I saw that man on the cross. You know, I do a lot of preaching in Protestant churches. And the Protestants oftentimes say to me, Father Albert, you Catholics are so odd because y'all seem to forget that Jesus rose from the dead. So why do you keep him on the cross in your churches? Because when you come to our churches, you see he's not on the cross, he's been raised. And I always have to remind the Protestants, well, you and I already know, that the reason why we keep Christ on the cross is to remind us of what love is all about. We keep Christ on the cross in our churches not because we want to focus on Jesus' suffering. We keep him on the cross to remind us just what love is. That when you authentically love, you pour yourself out. That when you authentically love, you're not always waiting to get the pat on the shoulder. We remind each other by looking at the cross that when we love, we give, and even when we have nothing left, we keep on giving. And that, my friends, is the third way to live like a saint. You want to be a saint? All you got to do today is love. Even when you're ready to wring the neck of your teenager, you just keep on loving. That a third way to get into heaven by being a person of love. And those of you who have heard me preach either parish missions here in New Orleans or who come every year to the Day of Recollection I give in Rosaryville, you know I'm going to tell her story because she is the most incredible example of what love and holiness is all about. We know she was born somewhere between 1833 and 1848. We don't know for certain. All we know is her first name was Julia. And Julia was born in Hannibal, Missouri as a slave. And as a young child, one day, the slave master was beating her mother with a whip. And little Julia ran to her mother to protect her. And that whip cost her her right eye. And so when you see the only picture that we have of her, you will see that right eye has been torn out. When Abraham Lincoln let the slaves go free in the Emancipation Proclamation, Julia Greeley would make her way from Missouri. She'd go to New Mexico, and she would end up in Denver, Colorado. And it's at that time that she begins to call herself Julia Greeley. And we scholars think the reason why she started calling herself Greeley was because there was a man, Horatio Greeley, who helped convince Abraham Lincoln to sign the proclamation to free the slaves. And so now she's known in the history of spirituality as Julia Greeley. Julia Greeley develops a love for the Sacred Heart of Jesus. So she goes and she's baptized a Catholic at Sacred Heart Church in Denver, Colorado. It still stands. I was there. And she would make her living as a nanny and a cook for white people. Julia Greeley only made $10 a month. And every month, with her $10, she would go and buy everyday necessities. Toothbrushes, toothpaste, socks. And she would put them in a red wagon. And every night, under cover of darkness, she would pull that red wagon down the streets of Denver, Colorado, giving out things that people poorer than her needed. And she always did it at night. And the reason why she did it under cover of darkness, she didn't want white people who had been helped by her to be embarrassed that they were helped by a black woman. There are 2 eyewitnesses. And remember this, because I'm going to mention it towards the end. We have 2 eyewitness accounts of people seeing Julia Greeley at night walking with a mattress on her back. She had heard that there was a white family who had 2 children who didn't have a bed. And so she managed to get this mattress. And she would deliver this mattress to that family. Julia Greeley, who never slept in a bed her life. She always slept outside with a pet dog. We have a story. One day, a young white family sees Denver's Angel of Mercy, as she was called. They see Julia Greeley. And they go up to Julia Greeley and they say to her, Julia, we've been trying to have a baby and we're having no luck. And Julia Greeley went up to the young wife and put her hand on her shoulder and said, Sugar, don't worry. You're going to have a baby next year. When you go home today, when you go home, Google Julia Greeley, Greeley, and you will see the only picture in existence that we have of her. And there she is, with that broken right eye, holding a white baby. The baby whose birth she had predicted. Remember I said that we have 2 witnesses of her carrying that mattress? Last year, when they exhumed her body to begin the process of her canonization, there were 2 forensic experts who studied her skeletal remains, and they said her body was riddled with arthritis. And yet, even with that pain, she would carry that mattress to that poor white family. Julia Greeley, her devotion to the Sacred Heart transformed her into the Sacred Heart with simple acts of love. And she would get a special gift because she would die on the Feast of the Sacred Heart, 1918. And when word on the street in Denver, Colorado got out that their angel of mercy had died, people rushed to Sacred Heart Church. The news reports said 1,000 people went past her coffin, most of them white, most of them poor. Julia Greeley, she shows us just how to love. You don't have to do it in big, bombastic ways. You can do it in very small ways. And let me tell you something. If you should ever find yourself in Denver, Colorado, as I did earlier this year, go to the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception. And go not to see the beautiful cathedral, and it is beautiful. No. Go there. Walk up the center aisle. And then go to the right side of the main altar, where there is a side altar dedicated to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And underneath that statue of the Sacred Heart, you will see a wooden box encased in glass. with the wax seals of the Vatican. There are the remains of Julia Greeley. And you can go right up to her and touch her coffin. Let me tell you something. They have started the process of her canonization. And she's a shoo-in. She'll be declared a saint, hands down. And you know why? Because Julia Greeley became the Sacred Heart. She shows us in her life by how she lived why you and I keep Christ on the cross. To remind us of what love is all about. May the Lord give you his peace.